What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, September 28th, 2017. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. So let's just get right on down to it. Now, as you know, last Friday, the Department of Homeland Security came out with this story saying that they had notified 21 states of attempts to hack their election systems during the general election last November. And everybody said, oh, there it is, the proof. The Russians were tinkering with our election. Evil Russians, let's go get them. And then earlier this week, the Department of Homeland Security started contacting some of these states and saying, actually, no, it wasn't Russia. We can't really determine who it was. So, but we're pretty sure it wasn't Russia. And don't forget, during the election, the Department of Homeland Security itself was caught trying to hack into voter databases in, I think, about 5 different states here. So they went out to Wisconsin and said, no, it wasn't the Russians. And today, California has responded saying it's clear that the Department of Homeland Security was wrong. And California is saying that they have no evidence Russia hacked the voting systems there. They've got illegal immigrants voting. They've got the dead voting. They had ballots that simply disappeared, but no hacking of the systems that they can trace back to Russia. So, again, that whole story is falling apart completely. And, yes, there's a lot of election fraud in this country. It's domestic. Why aren't we dealing with that? We've got this official narrative. They're out there to demonize Russia. They want to make Russia this enemy that we're all so afraid of, that will ignore what our government is doing and cling to their ankles and say, save me from the evil Russians, daddy government. Because that's what worked back in the 1950s and 1960s when Americans were uninformed, naive, stupid about the real nature of the world and the nature of our own government here. Now, Mark Zuckerberg is starting to fire back. He's starting to feel like a punching bag because the liberals are all claiming that he was trying to help Trump, and the Republicans are all convinced he was trying to help Hillary Clinton, and it certainly looked that way from over in here. And now Zuckerberg is trying to get out of this mess over these ads, which they try to make a big deal. They pressured Zuckerberg to find ads that could somehow be traced back to anybody linked to Russia. And at first, Zuckerberg said, no, we don't have any. Then more pressure was put on him. And then literally people flew out from Washington, D.C. to meet with Zuckerberg demanding the right response. So Zuckerberg turned over 3,000 ads saying, aha, we have 3,000 ads. See, proves Russia was tinkering. Even though 3,000 ads on a $100,000 budget is really not going to have much impact on an election where millions and millions of dollars are being spent by all the leading parties. Finally, the ads got leaked out, and as it turned out, most of them were social issue ads. A lot of them were supporting Black Lives Matter. And the ones that took a position on the election itself favored Hillary Clinton. So this whole story has blown back up in their face, and now Zuckerberg is coming on back because he's feeling he was used and abused. And this is one of the few times that I'm actually sympathetic to Zuckerberg's position. He was used, and they used his social media platform and tried to drag him into this frame Russia for what's going on. And I'm glad he's speaking out because more and more people who get pressured by the government to conform to the narrative, they need to speak on out. And they need to inform their fellow Americans that, yes, the narrative is being shaped around you for you to hate Russia so much you forget all the reasons why you should hate the federal government in Washington, D.C. Now, Jeff Sessions has sort of been not really doing much of anything the last several months, but all of a sudden there are now changes within the Justice Department. He's hired Matthew Whitaker to serve as his chief of staff, replacing Jody Hunt's place as Hunt moves up to Assistant Attorney General in charge of the department's civil division. And what makes Whitaker unique is he thinks Robert Mueller's investigation into Trump is a witch hunt. And Whitaker also thinks there's a strong case that can be made against Hillary Clinton, over her email server. So maybe all of a sudden Jeff Sessions is starting to think about actually doing his job, and going after Hillary. Now, speaking of Hillary Clinton, one of her many excuses for having lost the election was that the women didn't vote for her. Like women were supposed to be obligated to vote for her just because they were women and she was a woman. And she's out there screaming, their husbands made them vote for Donald Trump, which is actually, if you think about it, very insulting to the women of the United States of America. They're still playing these identity politics. And it's interesting to see Hillary Clinton come on out and claim sexism was the reason for her loss, and then turn around and make such a sexist comment as women should vote for women candidates. And it really had nothing to do with her gender. I got a lot of email during the last year's campaign about, oh, you're just opposed to Hillary because she's a woman. I said, no. I don't have a problem with a woman as president of the United States of America. Hawaii's former governor, Linda Lingle, knows how to do the job. I would support her. If Tulsi Gabbard runs, I'm going to back her, even though she's in the other party, because she's amazing. I'll support her for president. It had nothing to do with Hillary being a woman. People in America just didn't want that person in the Oval Office. And I know we're all disappointed with Donald Trump on a lot of different areas, but I'm still convinced we would be much worse off with Hillary in that Oval Office. Well, now Michelle Obama has come on out there joining Hillary to play these identity politics. And former First Lady Michelle Obama was speaking at the 2017 Inbound Conference, and basically how women in America who didn't vote for Hillary were voting against their own voice. And again, pushing this idea that women should vote for a female candidate, regardless of the candidate's qualifications. Now, it's rather odd to see this happening, because Hillary has stated that while she is returning to politics, she's not going to run for president again, but it looks to me like she's seriously thinking about going back on that. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Now, Chelsea Clinton, when the Clintons were in the White House or back in Arkansas, Chelsea was this little kid growing up, and so she was off limits. And we had the story about Webb Hubbell being her real biological father years ago, and we didn't run with it because that's one of the rules that we have here at whatreallyhappened.com. The family is off limits. You don't go after the spouses. You don't go after the children. That's just not right. We saw the candidates last year not go along with that rule and go after family members, just anything that they could use to slander and smear and defame each other. It was a really dirty campaign. Well, Chelsea is no longer a little girl. She's a public figure. She is reportedly getting ready to run for Congress, and already she is proving that she is, in fact, her mother's daughter. Because apparently there is a company whose president is best friends with Chelsea Clinton, and they have received more than $11 million in contracts over the last decade from a highly secretive Department of Defense think tank, even though the company lacks official federal approval to handle classified materials. So the company is called Long-Term Strategy Group, and over the last 10 years they've received numerous Defense Department contracts, and their president, Jacqueline Newmeyer, is best friends with Chelsea Clinton. And this office in the Defense Department, the Office of Net Assessment, is so sensitive, it's housed in the Office of the Secretary of Defense and reports directly to the Secretary of Defense. So this is some serious deep planning stuff. It's not a little fringe group that's out there buying $600 toilet seats. So again, Chelsea is already looking to be her mother's daughter, and we need to keep that in mind as she starts to run for public office. Now, fortunately, we mentioned this yesterday about the problems of getting supplies to Puerto Rico, where there was a legal blockage, and I said on the air, this is a perfect time for Trump to whip out his pen and do an executive order, and he has done it. President Trump waived the Jones Act, which allows ships from other countries to help take materials from the United States down to Puerto Rico. Now, the Jones Act was a bill that basically says if you're shipping cargo from one U.S. port to the other U.S. port, it must be on a U.S. flagged ship. And there just aren't enough of them in that part of the world. And so a lot of ships from other countries that wanted to help were being told that they couldn't. Well, Trump has waived the Jones Act. They're down there now getting more materials down to Puerto Rico, which is a good thing. They've hit another snag over there because all of the containers of food and medicine and supplies are piling up at the port in Puerto Rico. What they don't have right now is the logistical infrastructure to get it from the port into the interior of the island because the roads have all been smashed and they need to get some rough road trucks down there. I'm sure they're going to work it out, but it's getting really dire down there. Only 41% of the people have got water. The ATM machines have quit working. And so people are running out of cash. And even worse, there are now groups of looters roaming the countryside dressed up as Puerto Rican police. And like I said, these disasters can bring out the very best and the very worst in people. And it is really shocking to see how bad the worst can get. In other parts of the world, we've been talking about how this volcano is getting set to erupt on the island of Bali, and the number of people evacuated out of a potential eruption is now 104,000. And the area is rumbling, rocking, and rolling at least 500 tremors a day. It's expected to erupt at any time. And even worse, over on Vanuatu, there is another volcano that is starting to look like it's going to erupt, and they've evacuated 11,000 residents of this town. Ambe have been told to leave, and they're going to be moved to other islands. They're literally evacuating the entire island because the Manaro Voi volcano, it's already started spewing ash in a moderate eruption. So it's strange. There's a lot of geological activity going on. Those 3 major quakes in Mexico, plus they had a volcano. Moderate quake on the Cascadia Fault. That's got a lot of people worried. Quakes in Japan, Papua New Guinea. So interesting time to be a seismologist or a volcanologist. Now getting on to the war zones here, things are very, very interesting. It's obvious that barring a decap strike by the United States, an unprovoked strike by the United States, the Syrian conflict is winding down, and we're beginning to see who the real winners and losers are. And at the global level, this is widely seen as a big win for Syria and Russia, and by extension, a loss for the United States that sought to replace Bashar al-Assad behind lies of chemical weapons attacks, and we're there to get ISIS and al-Qaeda. However, at this point, it looks like Russia and the U.S. have established an uneasy accommodation. They're starting to work through these local ceasefire deals, the deconfliction zones. And the same seems to apply to Turkey and Iran, who are setting aside their differences to focus on the big picture in post-conflict Syria. The one loser who is not adapting to the reality is Israel. And they were out there to weaken the Syrian state, and they haven't. They absolutely have not. Now, an Israeli minister is coming clean saying that, yeah, for the most of the Israeli government, not all of them, but most of the Israeli government is now taking the opinion that Assad can sort of stay, and they're getting sort of comfortable with the idea that things didn't work out quite the way they wanted it to. Meanwhile, over in North Korea, Russia is warning the U.S. that this confrontational approach to North Korea is a dead end. It is clearly not working. The more the U.S. rattles the sabers, the faster and harder North Korea works on completing their missiles and nuclear weapons. And Russia is saying that any military conflict is going to have catastrophic consequences. And they're absolutely right. Look how ugly it got during the first part of the Korean War and how many people died in North Korea. They remember that. It's a clear memory for them. And they don't want the United States back in there for very, very good reason. Now, South Korea is starting to upgrade their weapons, and they're starting to make a huge investment in what are called standoff missiles. And these are weapons that are fired from a very great distance away from the target, out of the range of the target being able to shoot back at you. And so they're starting to do live fire testing of the Taurus KEPD 350 air-launched cruise missile. And this is a missile that can hit its target at a range of 248 miles, or at least that's the range for the live fire test. So everyone is getting the weapons in place here. And interestingly enough, Russia is massing their troops and weapons on the North Korea border. Now remember, China has already said if the U.S. attacks North Korea preemptively, without a provocation, China's going to come on in and intervene. Russia's not saying anything, but obviously both China and Russia do not want any conflict to go across the borders into their countries, knowing that the ultimate aim of the grand plan of the New World War is to destroy Russia and China, or at least the ruble and the yuan, and bring the world back under the domination of the U.S. Federal Reserve note. So they're getting their pieces in place, as it were. The U.S. is out there promising to deploy strategic military assets near the Korean Peninsula. Now, strategic usually means long-range bombers and potentially nuclear weapons as well, cruise missiles, things like that. So that they're basically pouring the weapons in there, and that means that they're planning buildups of weapons in Guam and Japan as well as South Korea. South Korea is still very resistant to the U.S. weapons coming on in there, especially the THAAD, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Missile, and China's not happy about that being there either. So it's time to really ask a question. Let's say that Trump goes to war with North Korea. How many people are going to die? Now, back in 1994, the commander of U.S. forces in Korea told President Bill Clinton that a war with North Korea would likely lead to 1 million deaths and roughly $1 trillion of economic damage. Now, obviously, today, North Korea possesses far more advanced military technology. And apparently, the North Korean youth are signing up to be part of the army. So the destruction and loss of life is going to be exponentially worse. Those Koreans are very, very tough people. They've got long memories. They remember how they suffered at the hands of the United States before. They do not want a replay. Interestingly enough, Labour Party in Great Britain was having their party conference in Brighton, and they were running a bunch of polls to try and get the sense of what the Labour supporters were thinking. And surprisingly, Labour voters said that Donald Trump, to their eyes, is far more dangerous than Kim Jong-un. He was described as a complete and utter maniac. And certainly I can understand that people in other countries recognize that Donald Trump is the one with the aggressive rhetoric, and Kim Jong-un is basically saying, if you mess with us, we'll mess with you. While Trump is saying, we're going to mess with you. And again, you have to look at the recent history, last 16 years, of who it is who's doing all the invading and drone striking and regime changing all over the globe. And it's certainly not North Korea, it's not Iran, it's not Russia, it's not China. It's the United States of America. And I know it's a hard thing to face up to, but we're the bad guys this world war. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, over at Fox News, they had a poll, and by more than 2-to-1, respondents to the polls think the best way to stop North Korea from continuing work on nuclear weapons is through diplomacy rather than threats of military action. And most say that the way President Trump is talking about North Korea isn't helping the situation. Now, Trump vows to totally destroy North Korea if the United States is forced to defend itself. That's what he said in his speech at the UN, where he referred to Kim Jong-un as the Rocket Man. And the Fox News poll finds voters didn't think this was a good thing to do. 70% say the way Trump talks about North Korea is not helpful. And it isn't. North Korea isn't talking about coming to destroy us. They're talking about defending their own country. And every nation has a right to defend themselves against a foreign invader. That's just common sense. And the United States government, convinced of its exceptionalism, thinks it has a right to disarm other countries to make it easier to invade them when it's economically necessary to do so. Now, a lot of people are talking about North Korea's nuclear weapons and their missiles, and are they really all that accurate? And there's some questions about that. They've had all kinds of staging problems on the Taepodong, too. But more and more people are starting to talk about the possibility of North Korea just lofting a nuclear bomb high over the United States and setting it off above the atmosphere to launch an imp attack. And in that case, it doesn't really, accuracy doesn't matter. Just anywhere over the United States, and they're going to get the effect that they want. It also makes for a great way for the U.S. to kick off a false flag to get a war going. Shoot off one of their nuclear missiles over the United States and cause an imp. Now, they know what's going to happen because the United States, when it was over in the South Pacific here, testing nuclear weapons, as an experiment, they just shot one out of the atmosphere and set it off, and they blacked out all of the islands of Hawaii, some of the other islands in the Pacific as well. But it shut down all the radios, all the street lights, and everything up here. So they know just how powerful this can be. That energy burst just kicks a dent in the Earth's magnetic field. And that shift in the Earth's magnetic field induces an electrical pulse in electrical lines. Now, the good news is, for the most part, the effect is most pronounced in long power transmission lines. Very small battery-operated devices are more immune to the electromagnetic pulse. Plus, you can always put them in a Faraday cage. And if you don't know what I mean by that, it's simply a metal box that's sitting on the ground so that any electrical pulse that hits the box goes into the ground rather than to whatever is inside that box. So if you have a nice prepping kit at home, you might want to think about lining your shed with some metal and grounding it if you're concerned about being hit by an imp attack. Sadly, we are also hearing a lot of talk over in Washington, D.C. about ending the Iran nuclear deal. And it's a lot of propaganda out there. This is coming out of Fox News, and they're reporting on this letter signed by 45 experts saying it's time to move beyond President Obama's appeasement of Iran and begin work on a new approach that fully addresses the menace that the Iranian regime increasingly poses to American and international security. What menace? Iran has not initiated a war of conquest in over 200 years. If you take all of the wars of the last 16 years and you put them in a little Excel spreadsheet and you look at the attacker column, you're not going to find Iran in there. That column is pretty much reserved for the United States and its proxies. The only threat posed by Iran is the same one posed by North Korea. They won't bow down. They're standing up to the United States of America, and that is encouraging other countries to start to stand up to the United States of America. That's the only threat. Iran is not a warlike nation. We'll be right back after these few words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take a phone call from Sherry in Fredericksburg. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind today?
Thanks, Mike. It seems like there's a potential. I have a couple of questions, but first, there seems like there's a potential showdown here that has many sides to it. As Russian blame fades, it seems to me. The Trump may have to get more aggressive verbally against his will. So I'm still trying to root for him here. Here's a question. Didn't Trump once take a peaceful stance against North Korea, like not too long ago, where we don't want to do anything there?
Well, what he said during the campaign was that under his administration, the U.S. was going to stop trying to be the police officer to the world, and we're going to get out of these foreign entanglements and bring all of our people home and focus on making things better in this country. It's not like all these soldiers and sailors and airmen are going to come home and they're not going to find things to do. This country needs a lot of work right now, and it has been neglected for the last 20 years of this military nonsense. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Make sure our dams are not going to collapse, fix our roads, fix our rail system. And that's, again, why Trump was saying he wanted to go back to being friends with Russia and friends with China. Mm-hmm. But he's apparently been co-opted, or however it is, he has gone back on his promises.
Things are changing on the political scene, and I think that they want to keep something going here. The other question, is anyone pointing any missiles in our direction? And I agree America could start something. I'm happy to say I think it's going to be short-lived, but, we are going to catch something here, because this is just too much for the powers that be to lose out on an opportunity they are just dead set on taking advantage of. Is anyone pointing missiles in our direction at all, or moving in on us just in case? I mean, I know we do that with them, and we kind of position ourselves. Are we trying to start something here? I mean,
yeah,
we're trying to start something, but are they moving in?
No, nobody is doing anything. Russia does not want a war with the United States. China does not want a war with the United States. Nobody wants war with the United States of America. They're trying to figure out how they can stop the U.S. from this eating the world one tiny bit at a time. Now, as far as the long-range strategic rockets, it's kind of an empty question. Back during the 1950s and 1960s in the Cold War, the targets for the missiles literally had to be dialed in at the missiles themselves. And so it was a really big deal. You had to go on into the silo, open a panel, get in there with a screwdriver, and say, this missile is going to be aimed at this latitude, this longitude. And it took a lot of time. So it was a big deal when they said, we're not pointing our missiles at you. It was a big deal. Today, of course, all of the missiles in the United States, Russia, and China, their targeting can be updated electronically right up to the point of launch, and in some cases actually in flight as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd be interested to know if they do anything to show that they're ready for us to start something, because I really think they've got to try. America, if they want this conflict to be, we don't stand a chance. You know that, because Russia and China against us. I mean, it's just that's what it's going to be. So, but that's. I just was wondering if their rhetoric is like we don't want to attack. We're not going to unless we absolutely have to. Then it's just a matter of, are we going to make it so they absolutely have to? This is going to be the big question on my mind. Because I don't like this.
Yeah, that's always the goal. The United States wants to always have it look like the other side struck first. And the classic example of that would be Pearl Harbor, where Franklin Roosevelt spent all of 1941 goading the Japanese into attacking U.S. assets in the Pacific in order to secure their access to minerals in the Philippines, and they knew the fleet was coming to Hawaii. The idea that it was a complete surprise was a complete lie, but it was very interesting and very revealing, because everybody sort of felt war was coming. It was even in the headlines on the Hawaiian newspapers the week before it happened. Japan is going to attack us. And the communications coming from Roosevelt to the Hawaii commanders Admiral Kimmel and General Short kept emphasizing over and over, we have to let the Japanese strike first, because they were going to present it to the United States that those dastardly Japanese just struck without warning. It was a complete surprise attack, and just get everybody riled up and ready to go to war and enlist in the military, and we're off and running. So that's how these things get started. That was why they sacrificed the Lusitania. They loaded it up with weapons. They'd been smuggling weapons to Great Britain despite the official U.S. position of neutrality for the war between Germany and Great Britain. The Germans knew they were smuggling the weapons. The German government actually took out ads in the New York newspaper warning people not to sail on the Lusitania because it was carrying weapons of war to Great Britain, and that made it a legitimate target. And so the Lusitania was sent into an area that was known to be crawling with U-boats. It did not have a military escort, and it was immediately sunk. And back in 2008, after years of official refusal of permission, divers finally gained access to the cargo holds on the Lusitania and confirmed it was loaded with military weapons and munitions. So it had been a big, big lie to make Germany the bad guy. And that's how these things get done. And that's why even Ron Paul is out there saying, be careful of a false flag. Right now, our government is so desperate for a war, that's about the only option they've got left, because nobody is biting. North Korea didn't actually shoot anything at us. Russia's not shooting anything at us. Everybody is pulling back because most of the world is of this opinion that I am, that the United States of America is a failing, collapsing empire. And if you just wait long enough, all of the problems are going to be solved when it comes crashing down the way the Soviet Union did.
That's right, and that could start it. That could start it if we get hit. We're not wiped out, mind you, but just hit.
Yeah, but
it's like saying, "This is what you get now. You want some more?"
I'm sorry,
possible
from who?
From Russia and China, from the opposition, the people that don't really want to start anything, but we keep needling them. We keep prodding them to start something.
Yeah, and they wisely and prudently are not taking the bait, because they know the U.S. government wants this war. The American people don't want this war, but the military-industrial complex wants this war. The bankers want this war. Wall Street wants the war, and they're working as hard as they can to get it. But in order to sell the war to the American people, it has to look like we were attacked. And if you go back and you look through history at how many times wars have been started with absolute lies and frauds. Spanish-American War. Oh, my goodness, the Spanish mine blew up the USS Maine in Havana Harbor. And it turned out, no, it was an onboard coal fire that set off an ammunition magazine. Pearl Harbor was a surprise. We know that was a complete lie. The Lusitania, the torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin was just a novice sonar operator. And so what they're looking for is the next device they can use. But I think the propagandists in Washington, D.C. are starting to understand the American people now, because of the Internet, because of the independent media, we're a lot more skeptical. We're aware of how propaganda works. We're aware of false flags. When they look at how, well, for example, the 9/11 hoax has fallen apart, along with Sandy Hook and the Boston Marathon bombing, and they're beginning to realize that the American people just don't buy the official story blindly the way we did back in 1941 or 1914.
Well, I'm delighted that Russia and China aren't making moves, that they're just going to wait and see. And I really think they got him between a rock and a hard place. I personally feel. I know a lot of people are down on him, but I don't know how he can help us now that he's stuck his, foot in his mouth or whatever you want to say. But I think it was prompted, and I don't think there's much he can do really now except just try to. I don't know how he can backtrack on this. I think we're just going to have to see how desperate America can get, and we're going to get hit if we get too desperate. But I think they don't want to annihilate us. We have too much to offer if we could turn around our country. And I think they see some potential for the future. And you never know when Trump has had some golf game with somebody. He needs some privacy so he can talk to people. That's very important, and I hope he's had some opportunities to say some things where the media
I don't
isn't
think so.
snooping.
I don't think so. I mean, certainly the White House is the most secure, surveilled building in the country. Everywhere he goes, he's surrounded not only by his private security, but by the Secret Service. And I'm sure that White House staffers are already always with him. And I would not be surprised if he was being wiretapped. Even now, remember, they were wiretapping him after he'd won the election.
Yeah.
So obviously,
there's ways of doing that.
Yeah, there's definitely ways of doing that. Now, we need to remember something. When the Soviet Union collapsed, nobody started a war against them. There was a lot of rhetoric about now they're down, they're weak, let's wipe them out, and nobody went with that. So when the U.S. government collapses in the same manner, we're not going to get attacked. The only way we're going to be attacked is if we attack countries that have long-range nuclear missiles. Russia, China, soon to be North Korea.
Well, I think it'll be short-lived if it has to happen at all, but I just wanted to be clear on if anything had been said or done on the part of Russia or China to show that they're anticipating something. If they're not anticipating it, then it's like I just said. It's America's.
Oh, they're anticipating it. I mean,
method of operation.
They're accelerating weapons production and stockpiling. They're just not moving any of their assets in a threatening manner around the shores of the United States of America.
Good. They're wise not to do that, because we could use that against them if we wanted to.
Well, heck, look how hard they tried to use a military exercise in their own territory. You know, when Russia was having this exercise in Belarus. And on the other side of the border in Europe, we've got all these NATO forces there champing at the bit, ready to go. And they were saying, oh, the Russians are coming to invade Europe. Nope, they finished the exercise, they went home. And so anything Russia does, or North Korea, or China, is going to be basically spun in the worst possible interpretation. They're coming to get us, and we have to get them first, and blah, 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 blah. But Ron Paul is absolutely right. Because the U.S. government is unable to goad these countries into doing something overt, that they're probably considering another false flag. And especially in terms of North Korea, the U.S. could easily fire a missile up over the United States out of the atmosphere, set off a nuke, trigger an EMP, blame North Korea for it. There'd be absolutely no evidence anywhere that could be used to contradict the official story, other than that anybody believing the official story from the U.S. government is an idiot.
I had a feeling about that. I thought they might do something to Japan and blame us, and I guess that might still be on the table. I don't know, because I don't know where they are now. We talking about America and what they're planning, but it seems to me that they'd be planning something, because they don't want to let this blame Russia thing die. They're going to find something. Maybe. So
it's fizzling.
That helps.
It's fizzling. It's 1-0 burger after another. Anyway, Sherry, I've given you a lot of airtime here. The phone lines are loading up here, so we're going to let you go and switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike.
Hi.
Oh, yeah, if you look, the Russians just did an experimental test on the Topol missile the other day.
They did two of them.
You know, they're not stopping.
No.
I mean, they'd be foolish to stop. You know, I mean, hey, Mike, you know, if anything's going to come, it's going to come from the West or Japan, because, you know, if you look, Japan economically, they're in pretty bad shape.
Yes.
They've been printing money for how long? You know, and they also, remember that, somebody took a flight from Japan and, you know, and landed in China, and they said it's night and day with the airports. The airports in Japan are still stuck in the 90s, and the ones in China are like modern. So, you know, they pretty much have like a dead economy in Japan. Like ours, we really have no growth going on.
I think Japan right now has the highest debt to GDP ratio in the entire world. Probably a lot of people are surprised that it isn't the United States. We have the highest total debt, but in terms of debt to GDP, we're not as bad off as some other countries. And again, Japan, like China, a large part of their economy depended on their manufactured products being bought by Americans here in the United States. We can't do that anymore. We don't have any money. And so as our consumer economy has collapsed, it has had serious repercussions for many countries in Asia that supplied the goods for those big box stores.
Hey, Mike, did you see that Ukrainian explosion at the military depot the other day? It was the best thing I've ever seen.
No, I missed that one, but I'm sure it was a lot of fun. I mean, obviously, when you're at war with somebody, getting those ammunition depot, that's a real score.
You got to watch the video, Mike. It's a couple minutes long, but you got to watch the finale. It's an explosion like you've never seen in a while, and that's the second time. One, I think, happened a couple months ago. Yeah. Right? I think like about 6 months ago. So somebody keeps like dropping cigarettes or something.
Well, either that or a mortar shell got in on them. But again, I can't imagine anybody working in an ammo depot who'd be lighting up a cigarette or a cigar. It's definitely a no-smoking zone.
Yeah, but Mike, they're Ukrainians.
Let's not go there. Let's not go there. All right, Dustin, thanks an awful lot.
Thanks, Mike.
We're going to let you go, and we're going to start with Mo in Florida. And Mo, what is on your mind?
On my line, yeah, you're on my line, Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm a little punchy.
Hey, Mike,
I didn't get a lot of sleep last night.
Were you worried about something the crazy North Koreans going to do?
Well, that's part of it. The other part of it is there was a lot of noise in the neighborhood last night, and I just any noise, I sit up straight in bed, wide awake. So anyway, back what is it you want to talk about?
If you don't mind, I jump ahead to the economy just real quick here.
Okay.
I think what's going to happen is, do you have time?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. Yeah. We're coming up on a commercial break, so stay on the line, and I'm going to come back to you after the commercial break, and you can give us your economic wisdom. All right. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Somebody just sent me that video Dustin was talking about this ammo depot explosion in Ukraine. It is spectacular. We just posted it to whatreallyhappened.com. The really amazing part of the story is apparently only one person was injured in all of this. And when you look at the size of that explosion, you're just going to say, wow. I mean, that is just amazing. All right, we're going to go back to Mo in Florida. You wanted to talk about the economy, and what is your question?
Hi, Michael. No, I just want to get your opinion. But before I ask a question or get your opinion, I want to tell you I am not a scientist.
Okay.
But I did find something faster than the speed of light. And you say what?
Bad check.
When somebody calls Alex Jones and starts talking about Israel, how fast he moves to a commercial is actually faster than the speed of light. And it's just amazing. They should figure out how he does that.
Well, that's amazing. Here at RVN, of course, the commercial schedule is fixed. I can't call down a commercial to get rid of somebody who's saying something I don't agree with. I can always drop them, of course, but I tend not to do that unless I'm really pushed. Yeah, it's Alex Jones has made no secret of the fact that he's a friend of Israel. In fact, if you go to YouTube and run a search, Alex Jones, friend of Israel, you'll see a video that he made many years ago where he came on out and said, I'm a friend of Israel. I'm always going to be a friend of Israel. And all of a sudden, the money started pouring in to build his broadcast empire.
No, you're right. You're right. It's bad, right? Because I learned a lot from him. Well, you keep, you tell it like it is, Mike. I don't always agree with you, but, you're a truthful person. That's why people call into you. Well, my question is this. I think what's going on with this cryptocurrency, they are going to get everybody into this, and then there's going to be a problem, just like with Equifax. There's going to be a disaster, and they've already got theirs ready to go. And so they'll just come offer everybody, and then they'll have the cashless society where they can go, below zero and take your money away, the bail-in. And then what happens from there? Some people think it's going to go to gold or whatever, but I do believe that there's a lot of people talking about this. I'm not smart enough to figure it all out, but I do see it happening. I think that they're going to get everybody in cryptocurrency, pretend like they hate it, and then it's going to be something connected with the SDR or whatever, and then, there's your ink and papers now, ethereal nothing. You don't even have the paper anymore. And that's kind of what, Rousseau was saying, and then I think the next thing is the chip. But, I don't know. I wanted to get your opinion on that,
Well, you've actually hit a lot of separate issues there. I think a general response to that is going to be that no matter what gets invented, like Bitcoin or whatever, the first thing that the people in positions of power are going to say is, how can I take control of this to make money off of it? And so the people who actually develop these technologies may have the very best of intentions, but they get subverted by those around them who come on in and say, I'll finance the development, but you got to do what I say. Anyway, listen, we got to take a break for station identification. Thank you very much for the phone call, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2, and we're going to go right back to the phone lines here. Tom in Indiana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, yeah, what Dustin said about that ammo dump, when back in 1969 I was in charge of the backup group to secure an ammo dump explosion after it exploded, and it was just like that film for a half an hour. It was like at 8:30 at night, and for a half an hour that ammo dump blew up. It looked like Pearl Harbor over and over again. But what you don't realize is all that blows up comes back down.
Yes.
So we had to wear our steel pots and stuff, and this stuff was just coming down all over the place. We were half a mile away from there at the time, and we lost 2 guys in that ammo dump. They vaporized. But, yeah, it was kind of interesting. And I want to ask you, did you really smoke oak leaves?
Did I what?
Oak leaves and maple leaves and things like that, the leaves.
No.
I sent you some leaves.
Yes. No, I was just trying to be funny in my reply. And okay, for the listeners' benefit, this gentleman sent me a letter. We've been corresponding, and he sent me some of the leaves from his part of the country because we don't have those trees here in Hawaii. And I wrote back that I put them in my Pakalolo pipe, but I don't want to do it again because I smoked those leaves, and I started thinking Donald Trump was doing a good job. So it was a real bad trip.
Super. Hey, I found a good way to advertise your show. I put it on Craigslist. I took pictures of those billboards and put for real news, not fake news, and I put it under a free ad. So a lot of people go to free ads on Craigslist and they see that.
Well,
so
thank you very much.
Way to advertise your show.
Thank you very much. And I remember the pictures of your roadside signs.
Well, Lou, I'll see you later.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Okay, the phone lines are open. We're going to get back to the news. We were talking about how we're starting to see this propaganda run-up for the U.S. government to pull out of the Iran deal. John Bolton has basically written an editorial, I guess you'd call it that, over at the National Review, where he's actually laying out a plan how to get out of the Iran nuclear deal. And it's 5 pages long, and he says when you fill in the details, it's going to be a comprehensive 100-page playbook to get on out of the Iran deal, so we're free to go to war against them. And all I can say is to John Bolton, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your Dayglow orange jumpsuit from the CIA's torture centers. You watch your head on the transport plane, and we'll call Iran and tell them you are on your way to kick their butts all by yourself here. But again, we are seeing a very difficult situation, because if the United States, if Donald Trump pulls out of the Iran deal, when Iran is fully in compliance with the deal, and the IAEA has said that, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs has said it, the entire excuse for pulling out of the deal is they may be technically in compliance with the requirements of the treaty, but they're not getting in the spirit of the deal, which is disarmament leading to eventual invasion. And if Trump does that, it is going to complicate relations with the rest of the world, not least of which North Korea. How is North Korea going to be convinced that if they stop work on their nuclear arsenal, they'll be left alone by the United States, when the experience of Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Libya argue against it? It's also going to strain relations with the other members of the P5+1 that signed that treaty. And they were perfectly happy with the way things are going, and the U.S. is just unilaterally going to end the deal. So back up at the UN, Nikki Haley is out there at the United Nations trying to build a foundation to end the agreement. Yes, Iran is technically in compliance with the P5+1 deal, but they're refusing to smile about it or some such nonsense. And again, while Iran is fully in compliance with the P5+1 deal, they have shut down all research into nuclear weapons. They are allowing full inspections by the IAEA. They sent all their enriched uranium to Russia. What they are not doing is allowing the U.S. government to expand the inspections into non-nuclear military facilities. In other words, they're not going to let the U.S. simply spy on everything else they're doing with regard to building defenses. And that seems to be the point everybody's trying to focus on. Yes, we didn't mention these other sites in the agreement, but in the spirit of the agreement, Iran should allow us to just inspect absolutely everything. And by the way, leading up to the war in Iraq, they were playing the same game there. Okay, we can't find any chemical weapons. We can't find any nuclear weapons here. We want to examine here. We want to inspect there. They even want to inspect Saddam's own home, like he was going to have a chemical weapon hidden under his bed. That's how ridiculous it got. All right, we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Over in Israel, they have just had a huge ceremony marking 50 years of Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank and the Golan Heights. And Netanyahu is responding to criticism by the United Nations about these illegal settlements by saying the settlements will never be removed. Even though they are illegal under international law, we're here to stay forever. We're the chosen people. International law doesn't apply to us, blah, 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 blah. You're a bunch of anti-Semite Jew haters, and so forth and so on. Meanwhile, Israel's trying to cover up their role in the recent Myanmar crimes against Rohingya, because apparently Myanmar was buying a lot of the weapons they were using in what looks like an attempt at genocide from Israel. And Israeli attorney and human rights activist Itay Mack was trying to force Israel to reveal its arms sales to various violent regimes. And Israel's state attorney asked the High Court to retroactively classify all the records and proceedings related to Mack's latest suit. So basically what Israel has said is we're going to just cover it up. There's a gag order on all of this. You're not allowed to ask these questions about arms sales that we sold to Myanmar. Remember, it wasn't until the collapse of the government of South Africa that we found out Israel had been trying to sell nuclear weapons to them. So we have no idea what they're out there doing right now. Now, getting on over to Iraq and Turkey, who are supposed to bear the losses for the formation of an independent Kurdistan, Turkey has now stopped training the Iraqi Kurdish Peshmerga after the independence vote, because prior to the independence vote, the Peshmerga was sort of on Turkey and Iraq's side against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and now all of a sudden they're on the other side, and Turkey's decided maybe we shouldn't be training people who are going to be on the other side of a possible conflict over the new Kurdistan. Now, Chuck Schumer is out there saying, he backs the formation of a new state out of northern Iraq. It's not up to you, Chucky. You don't have anything to say about what's going on in Iraq. That's up to the Iraqi government. This is another example of this attitude problem the U.S. government has. We're exceptional. We're allowed to go into other countries and tell them how to live their lives and what they're going to do. Now, the Prime Minister of Iraq has issued a demand that the Kurds cancel the referendum result. Just cancel it. Erase it. The final results came on in 92% of the voters are in favor of seceding from Iraq. And Prime Minister Haider Abadi has threatened military action in retaliation, and it may be coming because remember, before the referendum was held, Baghdad demanded the Kurdish regional government surrender control over all the airports in the region to Iraq. The Kurdish regional government has refused. So it is just building up more and more. And now we have Iran ready to cooperate with the Iraq army on the shared borders. How long we have come since the Iran-Iraq war, which is instigated by the United States. But now they're united again against terrorism and the formation of a Kurdish state. Turkey, Iraq, and Iran are considering a joint military action against the Kurds. So it may be on there. And this would be an open door for the United States to go back on in and establish a new military presence right in the heart of the Middle East. Now, one thing that the Kurdistan regional government did that they probably should not have done was arbitrarily declare Kirkuk to be part of the newly created independent state of Kurdistan, because it isn't currently part of the semi-autonomous Kurdish region in Iraq. And so there is a focal point, and Iraq is already deploying their troops to Kirkuk in case there's going to be some kind of a secessionist fight there. Now, it's rather interesting how rapidly this is moving forward when you consider that the independence referendum is non-binding. It doesn't set a date for secession. It doesn't compel the Kurdish regional government to actually do anything. It's an expression of the will of the people. It was largely symbolic, and yet everybody is acting like the Kurds are already seceding. And again, so many fights going on around the world, so many little tiny wars. And we're just waiting for something that's going to glue them all together, and we'll all sit down and say, yep, it's a new world war, all right. By golly, was staring us in the face all these years. Didn't recognize it here. By the way, apparently back on the 22nd of September, the U.S. conducted an airstrike on Libya. And the corporate media was too busy going on and on about the football players kneeling for the national anthem to bother reporting it. But apparently this is the first airstrike in Libya under the Trump administration. So the strikes were carried out by armed Reaper drones flying from a base in Sicily. And apparently the two governments of Libya, the one from the Libyan people and the internationally approved puppet regime, were not informed, and they're a little upset, and I can certainly understand that. Meanwhile, in another indicator that the rest of the world is getting tired of the U.S. exceptionalism and the U.S. sanctions, Switzerland is going to fortify the bilateral ties they have with Iran. And apparently they had a private sector delegation from Iran to Switzerland. Included the head of Tehran Chamber of Commerce, Industries, Mines, and Agriculture, met with the newly appointed ambassador of the Central European nation to Iran to discuss ways of strengthening bilateral ties, mainly by resolving banking issues inside and outside Iran, another indicator that Europe does not want to go along with U.S. sanctions on Iran. What's the U.S. going to do? Bomb Switzerland? Nobody bombs Switzerland. That's where all the rich people have their money. Now, General Joseph Dunford, he's chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he appeared before the Senate Armed Services Committee Tuesday to testify on a variety of subjects, and he came up with this claim that China will displace Russia as the greatest threat to the United States by 2025, and we have to have more military spending to maintain a competitive advantage over Beijing. Now, the reality is the U.S. is already spending far more on the machinery of death than Russia and China probably put together. But it's spent foolishly and wastefully. And we don't have it to spend anymore. And this is another parallel with the decline and fall of the Soviet Union, where they were pumping so much of the nation's gross domestic product into the military that they bankrupted themselves. And we're on the verge of that right now. Donald Trump really should not have gone along with an increase in spending on the military. He was pandering to the military-industrial complex. We just don't have the money. And when they do have the money, it is being spent very foolishly. We were talking the other day about how they've had to do so many patches and upgrades on the F-35s that they're now considering taking some of those units and not upgrading them anymore, just using them for training or for testing and never sending them into combat. We're now hearing that the Navy is just going to scrap the whole program for the Independence-class littoral combat ships and the Freedom-class littoral combat ships and come up with a new unified littoral combat ship concept. We're spending money hand over fist. We're not getting the bang for the buck for it. More about that a little bit later in the show here. So they're out there trying to make us convinced that Russia is our greatest enemy, and apparently after we deal with Russia, we give Putin what for, we'll be after the Chinese. And again, that's what's driving the war agenda, to get rid of the threat to the U.S. dollar posed by the yuan and the ruble. So the world will come back under the hegemonic domination of the U.S. Federal Reserve note. Getting on back to the F-35, apparently it can't even fire missiles at moving targets. They're hoping they'll get there next year. But apparently the current software configuration cannot see what missiles are on the rails. It's supposed to have an automated system to say, this is the missile you have on the rail, these are the capabilities, and to integrate with the cockpit targeting system in order to launch the missile at moving targets. And apparently when you have GBU-49s on the rails, it shows GBU-12 in the cockpit. Ooh, gee, golly whiz. We'll fix this on the next software update, the Block 3F. They're already putting these things out. They're deploying them at bases. They don't work yet. They don't work. They sure look pretty sitting on that runway, don't they? Meanwhile, Russia's come out with a new, what they're calling an electromagnetic missile that will turn enemy weapons into scrap metal. And apparently this missile uses a very powerful UHF impulse that can destroy the electronics of weapons miles away. And apparently this is called the Alabuga, a new electromagnetic missile that uses this powerful UHF emitter to disable all enemy electronics within a radius of 2.3 miles. Now, looking at the numbers on what it takes to fry electronics with UHF, it appears to me that Russia has made some kind of a breakthrough in getting huge amounts of radio waves out of small devices. And it wouldn't be the first time Russia's come up with some really exotic ways of generating radio signals. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Fran in Washington, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha nui nui, Michael.
Aloha nui nui.
Hey, I've got another reason to take the knee during the anthem. This government does no longer represent the people, and showing respect for a flag that represents a government that is so terribly corrupt, yeah, that's a reason to take the knee during the anthem.
Well, see, I'm one of those people who thinks that the flag represents the country and its people, and that it's time for us to realize that, contrary to what George Bush said, it is possible to love your country and your fellow citizen while hating the central government. Remember when he came on out and said, you can't do that. You can't claim to love your country while you're hating your government. If you're hating your government, you're hating your country. He was trying to blur the lines together. Well, that didn't stick. Again, earlier in the week, Gallup poll, 71% of Americans think the country is being run very badly, governed very badly, and yet this reaction to the NFL stunt is showing Americans want to feel good about their country and their fellow citizens. They just don't feel that way about the government. And we need to understand there is a break there between the two that allows us to reconcile that. Fran, we got to let you go and do some commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And getting on to the economic news. The Federal Reserve has just admitted they were wrong about this idea of unwinding the balance sheet. And apparently they've discovered they really can't make it right, and they're backing off from that plan. And that's why Janet Yellen went from talking about there was going to be huge inflation to earlier in this week saying the inflation will just be 2% for the next few years. So they're just going to let things continue on as they are. And they're just going to say whatever they need to say to keep the stock market happy. And it's all fakery and fraud. Now, the U.S. federal government just passed a record $20 trillion in publicly held debt. That's bigger than the entire economy of every country in the European Union put together. And the debt is only going to grow higher unless President Trump and the U.S. Congress can agree to unprecedented spending cuts, like the military, which is already half of the spending for the country. We're spending about half of our gross domestic product on the military and wars. But as I mentioned before, when you look at another fiscal measure, the ratio of debt to gross domestic product, the U.S. is not the worst in the world. Japan is. Now, as you know, having failed to accomplish absolutely anything regarding Obamacare, now they're switching over to Trump's tax plan. And they're starting to put some details out. And basically they're trying to promise all the goodies, none of the pain. But Wall Street is out there saying, kind of lukewarm. Now, highly taxed U.S. companies and multinational corporations with large overseas cash holdings actually did well. Traders are buying assets expected to benefit the most from a change in tax policy. But what we're seeing from the Wall Street players themselves is not as enthusiastic. Bank of America Merrill Lynch didn't see anything in the tax plan drastic enough to change its economic outlook. And they're saying the report has a few more details, but far from comprehensive, containing all the goodies but none of the pain. And they're saying they believe the tax bill faces long odds, probably because of what happened to Obamacare. Morgan Stanley, similarly cautious, saying that it's an overview, but not a lot of fine details that they still need to work on out. Nomura expressed measured confidence around the ability of at least part of the tax plan to go into effect, but it does have some worries over their overall assessment. Congress is likely to pass tax cuts for individuals next year. They're saying it may not happen. Again, it's going to be the corporations and the bankers that are going to get the benefit. Remember what I said before about a recycling system to get the wealth accumulated at the top back down to the bottom, or your economy is going to collapse? This is more of the same. This is just more of the same. Wells Fargo is out there saying expectations of a sudden market jump are overblown. So far, at least as far as the money junkies are concerned, it's a big yawn. And like Trump Care, doesn't really seem to be significantly different from the predecessors, or what we already have. If you want this economy to kick off, you have got to lower taxes for individuals so that they've got more money to go into the stores and buy things with and get this economy moving again. There comes a point where you can literally tax a country into collapse, and we're there. And if you think the economy is healthy, take a look at Boston. Right now in Boston, because of foreign money, high demand, low inventory, $1 million home in Boston is now a fixer-upper. Meaning if you have the winning bid and you get to move into that house, already you're going to have to get out the toolkit and start fixing it up. $1 million for a fixer-upper in Boston. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the economic news. And the president of the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, is admitting that cryptocurrencies do not fall under the regulatory powers of the ECB. They have no power to regulate Bitcoin. It's outside of their jurisdiction. That, I think, is probably going to encourage a lot more people in Europe to get into Bitcoin. Because I think ultimately everybody understands at some point we have to break free of the private central banks because they are systems of enslavement through the imposed awareness of indebtedness. And it's a trap. Because by design, private central banks create more debt than money with which to pay the debt in order to lock in the system. And when that first pretty printed piece of paper goes into circulation, more money is owed to the bank than actually exists, and that's the trap. You can never get out of debt. You can never get out of the control of the private central bankers. No matter how hard you work, no matter how much you sacrifice, you belong to them forever as long as that bank exists. Now, as you know, China is pushing along with their new Silk Road initiative, and apparently in the latest iteration of the project of the new Silk Road, Ukraine is now absent, even though earlier the option of transit through Ukraine was being considered. But I guess China is looking at the very real possibility of sustained military conflict in that area, and they don't want to have anything to do with that. So they're rerouting someplace else here. The European Union is getting ready to resettle 50,000 refugees from North Africa into Europe in its latest bid to stabilize migration to the bloc. Doesn't sound to me like it's stabilizing migration. It sounds like it's accelerating it, enhancing it. Now, the European Commission says it set aside 500 million euros to fund the resettlement of refugees from Libya, Egypt, Niger, Sudan, Chad, and Ethiopia in order to deter illegal migration and reduce the attraction of people smugglers. In other words, they can't stop the illegal migration and the people smugglers, so they're just going to make it easier for people to come to Europe. That's not a solution. Enforcing your borders is the solution. And at the moment, Egypt really isn't all that war-torn. This is just a continuance of the globalist policy of trying to just blur every ethnic group on earth together into one mass, to take away our identities, to make us easier to control. Now, in response to the tremendous upset of the German election, where AfD just did a lot better than anybody was expecting, there are now green politicians saying that we have to keep the Muslims coming on in because AfD wants to close the borders. And they want to ban on foreign-funded mosques, and a statement that Islam is not part of Germany. Certainly hasn't been before in history. And so according to Gering Eckhart, the demands of the AfD are ridiculous, saying, I think, of course Islam belongs to Germany. And of course Muslims belong to Germany. And I think we can be quite happy about it. Well, yeah, if you're working for George Soros, I'm sure. And he goes on to say, I think we can be very happy about it. It would be very boring if we only had to deal with us. Now, I have to say that really is ridiculous. I was working on a film project in Germany back in the 90s, before all this migration. When I was in Germany, all I saw were Germans German culture, German food, German buildings, German architecture, German art. And it wasn't boring. It was certainly not boring at all. So they're still trying to sell this idea on migration and refugees and blurring everybody together for the New World Order. We're going to take a phone call here. Mark in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, good afternoon, or I don't know, it must be early afternoon in your time zone.
It's about 11:30 in the morning.
I wanted to comment. Oh, well, almost afternoon. I wanted to comment on the flag, and I do appreciate that your position that the flag represents the people, but I respectfully would like to disagree.
Okay.
Because every flag comes from a king or a monarch or some kind of despot, and following the flag is bullets and bombs. And I'd like to refer to Sandra Bland, where the officer that arrested her for a taillight had a flag on his left shoulder. And Nurse Alex Wobbles in Utah, I'm sure that officer had a flag on his left shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
Flags are representations of war and death and conquering. And for people, and the Pledge of Allegiance itself was written by a socialist, and they actually forced students to do the Blame Me salute. So the people were not being told the true history of the flag or the pledge or what flags represent. And so, you know, I don't oppose football players taking a knee, but that's a private enterprise of the NFL, and they determine what their players do and don't do. It's not in public opinion. Public opinion will get you killed every time or get you locked up.
Well, the NFL's own rules and regulations say that you will stand and face the flag during the national anthem. So it's right there in the NFL rules. There is no question that the NFL has already stated a position on this. Personally, I'm in agreement with those who say we shouldn't bother with the national anthem for sporting events anyway, but as I explained before, the rationale for that is the same that you had when the emperor would show up for the gladiatorial games in the Colosseum. Knowing that the games and the sports get everybody excited and feeling good, the goal there is to then transfer that feeling of power and excitement onto the rulers. Even though they're certainly not going to get down there in the arena and impress anybody anyway. And that's the reason why rulers have kept themselves very close to spectacle, whether it's gladiatorial games, baseball, basketball, football. Look at how many politicians go on out and throw that first pitch. So that's part of the psychology.
Right.
Football today is the modern incarnation of the gladiatorial games.
And the people are watching the destruction. Back then, it was people being murdered. But I'm sure Schumer is going off to decide who rules over the other countries, and he's got that flag in his hands, and it's bullets and bombs behind him. So it's just a destructive emblem. And
well, hang on,
idol worship.
I want to take exception to that because certainly, at least in the case of the United States, our flag originally was a flag of, by, and for the people of this country. Has it been hijacked as a war banner? Yes, no question about that.
I will agree with you there. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. And by the way, as a historical footnote, contrary to what you've seen on movies and TVs, most gladiatorial games did not end in death. They would end in injury. And that would be it. Very rarely was a game in the arena allowed to go all the way to death because it cost a lot of money to train a gladiator to that degree. They were very expensive assets. They were as pampered as today's modern athletes. I mean, in ancient Rome, women wanted to have sex with these gladiators. They were very popular. They were treated as the sports stars of their day. All right, let's go to John in Oregon. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. Hey, I'm a first-time caller here, and I just wanted to ask you if there are any solutions that come to mind with you as to what we could do about swaying the military-industrial complex or putting them on call to stop this forcing into this war that we have, that we're going to have.
I'm afraid the only thing that's going to stop them is when they lose.
Yeah, I'm afraid of that too, Mike. Well, I had just wanted to say that your previous caller before Dustin was right on the nose about these things that are happening. This false flag threat, I believe, is huge, and man, take it from me out here in Oregon, the people don't want war. I mean, and all this diversionary tactics and everything, with the NFL stuff and all this other fluff, it's really taken away from what the people should be focused on, and that is keeping us out of a war.
Well, I agree with you on that, and people do need. Think back to the 60s, where the government, specifically the FBI, was throwing all this stuff at us, the Black Panther coloring book, riots at Disneyland, and so forth, to keep us distracted and divided so that we couldn't come together and say, we want the war to stop. And if we could mobilize 300 million Americans to literally march on Washington, D.C. and say, we're not going to support this war any longer. We're not going to pay for it. You may not have our children. You will end this, because this war is not for our benefit. It's for the benefit of the defense contractors. It's for the benefit of Israel. It's for the benefit of the bankers. And we are risking an extinction-level event if this thing goes nuclear.
Absolutely, Mike. You hit it right on the head there, and I sure appreciate your radio broadcast, and I appreciate you putting this stuff out there. And I just don't know if there's a whole lot of people that are bringing this all to light. And I appreciate you being a beacon out there, putting out the truth and putting out what people are really feeling in this nation. Mm-hmm. And it just can't happen. So, Mike, I'm going to let you go, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the kind words, and we're going to let you go, and we're going to switch over to Yvonne in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi. Aloha. Am I coming in clearly?
You're coming in clearly.
Great. Okay, I have a question, Mike. You were saying earlier that, when Russia collapsed, nobody attacked them, and so that when, our empire collapses, you don't think anybody's going to attack us, and which I hope is true, but the war drums they're beating are just so hard. So I'm wondering, this is my question, if, you know how in all of the past wars, oftentimes the bankers would play both sides?
Yes.
And then just, okay. Is it possible that there's bankers in China right now? Because about 10 years ago, when I was into the whole Ron Paul movement, they were putting up, a lot of the conspiracy theorists were putting up videos that were saying that there were bankers in China that were kind of playing, I guess helping people in our government want to commit treason against us. And you know how, like, we owe China all that money? Well, not money, but they say that China bought our debt, however that works. Is it possible that maybe China does want to attack us? I know you're saying no, but everybody is screaming. I mean, Alex Jones is like a lunatic. He's saying that Ron Paul, he's like screaming about how Ron Paul is crazy. Because Ron Paul and you are like the only people that are saying that we're safe and that Korea isn't, because I think the way they're trying to present it is that Korea is like the proxy for China, and that China is going to use Korea to attack us. I mean, is it possible that there are some bankers in China?
Well, of course there are bankers in China. There are bankers everywhere. There isn't a country on earth that does not have the bankers present, and most of them operate private central banks where they're allowed to create money out of thin air and loan it into circulation at interest. But the issue is the propagandists have been trying to link North Korea to China and Russia for quite a long time. But again, these are the same people who told us all that Saddam had nuclear weapons. Now, in this situation where we're talking about the collapse of the central government in Washington, D.C., the way the Soviet Union government collapsed, the situation is if the federal government in Washington, D.C. collapsed, nobody has a reason to attack us anymore because the threat is gone. Because the ordinary people of the Soviet Union didn't have access to the weapons, didn't have an interest in starting a war. Their interest was in finding a way through to starting their country all over again. Once that threat is gone, you're going to find the rest of the world is going to take a deep sigh of relief, and they're going to pull on back and say, all right, we're going to help whatever country is going to form on that real estate in the North American continent. We're going to try and provide support for whoever wants to create a modern, peaceful nation. And we're going to oppose those who want to bring back the old system of private central banking and warmongering to cover the debt. So I'm not concerned about the reaction of the rest of the world in the event of the collapse of the federal government, other than that they'll be cheering and clapping and applauding, much as our people applauded the collapse of the Soviet Union. But I don't think there's going to be a military action, because at that point there wouldn't be any point. The military threat from the U.S. government is gone along with the U.S. government. And China coming on in...
And then if we...
China coming on in here with any kind of an attack, remember that debt that China bought is collateralized with physical assets in this country. They don't want to blow up the physical assets if they're coming in to try and foreclose on them, which, by the way, they shouldn't do, because I consider all of this land grab by the federal government in violation of the Enclave Clause to be odious debt. And that's one area where the American people are going to have to stand up and say there are some debts we are responsible for, there are some debts that clearly qualify as odious, and we're not going to pay them. And if you... Okay, I'll tell you what. Yvonne, stay on the phone. I'm going to come back to you after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're talking with Yvonne in New York. And you had one more comment about China possibly taking military action against the United States. Yvonne, are you there? Okay, I guess we lost her. So let's get on back here to the news. Budapest has announced an official blockade of Ukraine to EU integration. The Hungarian government has decided that they don't think it's a good idea for Ukraine to join the European Union, even though that was actually the reason for the coup d'etat and the ejection of Ukraine's elected government and the imposition of Poroshenko. Because prior to Poroshenko, Ukraine had been talking about getting closer to Russia, and by golly, we can't let that happen, so we're going to change their government and put somebody in who will enslave the people of Ukraine to the European Central Bank. And now Hungary is saying, hang on, I don't think so. So that whole issue of the EU holding together, it's starting to really show a lot of cracks, as well as it should. Now then, let's see, I'm looking at, the spoiled ones are hacking my web server right now. Let me get this little thing posted. This is a breaking story. Apparently China has now ordered all Korean businesses and joint ventures in their country to close within the next 120 days. So it's all part of the sanctions program. All right, getting on back to the news here. Let's talk about dollars and cents. You, the U.S. taxpayer, has spent more than $80 billion with a B on the Dreamers. $80 billion. Now, expanding that to the illegal immigrants That's costing $135 billion a year. The highest ever, and it's driven by the free medical care, the free education, and a huge law enforcement bill. And despite claims from pro-illegal immigration advocates that the aliens pay significant offsetting taxes, it doesn't happen. Apparently, the illegal immigrants paid $19 billion in taxes. So that only reduced the cost to us legal citizen taxpayers to $116 billion. So that's $116 billion for the illegals, $80 billion for the dreamers. So we're talking just shy of $200 billion. Now just imagine for a moment that money being spent on the condition of our roads. Just imagine that. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're going to take a phone call. Francis in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello. Aloha to you both. One quick question for you. Do you recall the last time or what year it was that there was a march on D.C.?
Not off the top of my head. I know there was a big one during the Vietnam War, and President Johnson wrote in his memoirs that was the moment he realized they'd lost the war in Vietnam, when he looked out on the mall and he saw all those people. I know there have been attempted million-man marches on Washington, D.C. since. They never achieved 1 million men, but I forget when the last one was.
Okay. Well, just to update you, of course, this was roughly about 11 years ago, give or take a year or whatever, but there was one march protest that occurred back in 2006 regarding the Shrub Jr.'s second administration term of against the occupation of Afghanistan over in the Middle East.
Yes.
And there was at least, if not more than several hundred people, maybe 1,000 in total, that actually marched down one of the major roads down to the Capitol. And they even went to the point of actually staging a die-in on the grounds of the Capitol, or whatever you want to call it, there in D.C., which people faced a very real prospect of being arrested for actually doing a die-in where they just simply laid there to represent a military personnel who lost their life for a worthless endeavor, for that matter, out of greed, of loss of life, and, well, bloodlust and so forth ad nauseum. And so I myself would have participated, but unfortunately, since my other half was still back at home, I would have had a heck of a time trying to explain to him why I was in jail.
It's always going to be an impediment, yes. Well, the problem with the problem with the marches today is they do happen. They're not given coverage by the corporate media. The pro-war rallies, the pro-war rallies do. And again, I remember back when they were talking about going into Iraq, and Clear Channel Radio, which owns quite a few of the stations here on Oahu, we're holding these rallies for people to come on out and support our troops. And you could show up, and they had free hot dogs and free soft drinks and free flags. And across the street, of course, there was a counter demonstration opposed to the war in Iraq. And I remember very vividly that a van pulled up from the local NBC affiliate, their news department. They got out of the van with their camera gear and the talking head. They literally walked through our demonstration without stopping, went on over, did the puff piece about these Americans are supporting our troops in their heroic battle against the evil Saddam Hussein. Then they shut on down, and just walked right back through our anti-war demonstration again without stopping, got in their van and left.
Well, it's very apparent that the major media are bought and paid for, so they know exactly what they want to promote and how to do it and so forth, and basically state that the people that are there, either for or against, represent the point of view of the everyday U.S. person, U.S. citizen on the street in the everyday downtown, pick your city or state for that matter. And quite frankly, it's just the opposite. The major media is not going to present dare I say, fair and balanced picture of the whole scenario. That's obviously an example of that kind of falsehood, for that matter. But the fact that a lot of people went there, protested that occupation and so forth, and then as a result, even before that, there were minor protests in the various cities, in various states for that matter. And at least the one I know of in particular that I attended during that same time period, actually had people rolling up to the grounds, the State House grounds, and actually tried to run over someone that had a sign at the corner of a intersection of a street that was protesting it. And then on top of that, another vehicle comes up and says, "Be glad you have the freedom of speech or whatever, because you won't have it anymore after this." And basically, verbally, not to mention almost physically, assault people that were protesting and so forth. And I was stunned at the ignorance that was being displayed.
Well, it's not necessarily ignorance. You have to understand a lot of these people are undercover FBI informants who have been told, go on out and harass these people, make them feel bad. It's a PSYOPs operation. And again, you need to go back and study the history of the FBI's COINTELPRO operation in the 1960s to see how the methods really work. And there's something you need to understand about the informant network. Terry Reid talked about it a lot in his book, Compromise, Clinton, Bush, and the CIA, where he said one of the advantages of being involved in the intelligence agencies is that it did give you a network of like-minded people, and the benefits extended beyond whatever the agenda of the country was. These were people you could do business with, and you knew you could trust them because you already had the goods on them to destroy them. And you need to understand the FBI is always recruiting on college campuses, even today, to get undercover informants, kids who are involved in courses leading to careers in law enforcement, and they'll convince them to be undercover informants. Well, when they graduate, they don't quit. They're still part of the network. They just go on out and they're informants in whatever company that they're hired into, and they're still part of that huge Stasi-like network. And so the FBI will send out a message saying that you all have to show up down at this or that protest rally and harass the people who are protesting against the government's agenda. And that's why you get people of all ages, coming on down and doing this harassment. Some of these people were college students back during Vietnam, and they've never broken free from that informant network.
Well, in that case, that's their conscious choice whether or not they wish to continue that or not, and they can always discontinue that and end it. But it's obviously very expressive of the fact that the alphabet soup agencies are monitoring the communications of the college grads and all that, and what their interests are heading towards and so forth. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing that.
Well,
then again, maybe they are.
A lot of it is done through personal contact because after that riot at Disneyland, I was approached by the guy who'd taken me down there, who revealed at that point he was an undercover informant. He was part of the operation, and he tried to recruit me as an informant, and that was the last day I ever talked to that guy.
Can't blame you for that.
Nope, not at all.
Of course, then again, who knows?
I'm not the informant type.
Is how much you would have paid you.
Yeah, I'm sure my life would have been physically and monetarily much better off if I'd gone along with that. My life would have been physically and monetarily much more comfortable if I'd shut up about Vincent Foster. I have regretted many times that I didn't have a pseudonym when I started that first Rancho Runamaca website, putting this information out there. But by the time I realized who it was I was really dealing with, it was too late to turn around and go back. And so basically, from my point of view, the U.S. government, specifically the Clintons, have declared war on me and Claire. And all I can do is continue to fight because I'm sure as heck not going to surrender.
Well, that gives whole new meaning to the phrase, hindsight is 20/20.
Yes.
Have a great one.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Getting on back to the news, we're talking about immigration. And again, look at how much of your tax money is being spent by the government to prop up the dreamers and the illegal immigrants. And it's time for Americans to look at how much money government is costing them, because government is the most expensive thing you're ever going to buy. It's more expensive than your home. It's more expensive than your children's education. It's more expensive than food. It's more expensive than medical care. Are you getting value for money? Is the government spending your money on you? No, it isn't. It's spending it on the dreamers and the illegal immigrants and Israel and the war machine. And there's almost nothing left over for the American people. We need a cash for clunkers act for the U.S. government. We take our old, inefficient, bloated, too costly federal government, we take it over to the junkyard, we put it in a little crusher-up machine, turn it into a metal coffee table, and then we all get a check for $20,000 with which to buy a new, smaller, more efficient, more cost-effective government that really works for us. It's time for us to have that here. Now, backing up this story about how, in point of fact, the illegal immigrants and the dreamers are not, in fact, paying enough in taxes to offset the costs for all the free education and free medical care, which us legal American citizens do not get, by the way. According to the Austrian Interior Minister, 90% of the migrants they've let into their country are on welfare. 90%. And they're saying the system is totally overwhelmed right now. They cannot handle the load. So sure, let's bring more of these migrants and refugees in. There's plenty of room and plenty of money somewhere. Now, everybody's still making a huge amount of fuss about this whole NFL kneeling thing. We've had a couple of calls here today. Frankly, I think somebody organized this to make a point, and I think it fizzled. I don't think they got the response they wanted. But one of the things that's come on out of there is that Representative Mo Brooks on Tuesday called for an end to all federal government support of the NFL. And basically said that includes termination of any and all advertising that is on the NFL games, because, you know, they run a lot of recruiting ads there. You know, think football is great? Come on in and try war. It's fantastic. And they're talking about forcing the NFL to return all these paid patriotism funds. That'll never happen. But the NFL's ratings are plunging. The memorabilia stores are saying people just have stopped coming on in. And I think where they miscalculated, somebody wanted to use the star power of the NFL to get people to start thinking that the United States wasn't very good. And the United States has got a lot of problems. Most of it instigated by the people who want us to believe that this country doesn't have a future. The globalists, the New World Order people. But I think the reason it failed, the reason why everybody was booing these NFL players, and by the way, the corporate media was refusing to show that, but you could hear it on the soundtracks. Americans do not like the way the government is running the country. Gallup polls, 71% of Americans don't think this country is being well run. But Americans still believe in the country itself, the United States of America. They believe in their fellow citizens. And they want this country to be great again, despite the failings of the federal government and Wall Street. And they saw this disrespecting of the flag and the anthem by these football athletes who are paid multi-million-dollar salaries as disrespecting the very nation in which they found such success and wealth. Americans saw this as dissing the American people. And that's why it blew up in their face. Now then, let's get on to the world of computers. We put up an article on whatreallyhappened.com. I absolutely love my Raspberry Pis. I got the little tiny Nano, and when it didn't have enough juice, I got a slightly larger one, which I'm using to run a separate terminal system into my website for maintenance tasks. But over at Tech Republic, they have a list of 20 new computer-on-a-card systems that are a little more pricey than the Raspberry, but they've got enhanced capabilities you might be interested in looking at. But there's no question that the Raspberry Pi itself has been a huge, unexpected success. People are buying these cards like crazy. They're making the most amazing little devices with them. And for somebody who wants to get into computing, it's very inexpensive to get a Linux system up and running. And it does remind us old people of how much fun computers could be when they first came on out. I mean, I still have my Commodore VIC-20 up there. And that was wonderful. You know, if it got into a hang-up, you turn it off, turn it on, it was back to factory, fresh reset. You could understand. One person could understand what was going on inside that box. If you could code machine code, you could push that thing to its limits. And that was a lot of fun. It was a challenge. Modern computers today have become too corporatized. Too much of our computers is hidden from us. The attitude now, it's none of your business what sits inside this computer you just bought. You don't need to know about the NSA and the CIA and the FBI and everybody else in there using your computer to spy on you without just compensation. There's a violation of the Fifth Amendment along with the Fourth Amendment. But the other problem I'm seeing is that in allowing computer systems to become as complex and obfuscated as they have become very difficult to maintain. And we're starting to see more and more major problems. And I don't just mean the breaches and the exposure of data. Apparently, there is a computer system that is used by quite a few airlines, and it went down for just 15 minutes before the backup system kicked in. But apparently this affected check-in at London's Heathrow and Gatwick airports, Charles de Gaulle in Paris, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Melbourne, Changi in Singapore, Johannesburg, and Zurich. And it just created a huge problem, long lines of furious passengers who could not get to their flights. Only 15 minutes, and it descended into chaos, which tells us there isn't a lot of resilience in that system. There's no margin for error. Now, whether this was just some component broke, somebody made a mistake on a keyboard, or somebody hacked into the system, we don't know yet. But there's an issue overall with the reliability of what are becoming systems that are critical to the smooth functioning of our society. We need to restore product liability for computers and software to incentivize these companies to produce quality, reliable, dependable products. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, I just wanted to raise a point here about the NFL investigations and the FBI and all that. And, you know, the Justice Department and the FBI, almost like the Supreme Court, can decline to take a case, any case, like nobody's, of course, done any investigation of the Clinton Foundation or any of that stuff. But they've looked pretty bad the last couple of years with the Tsarnaev assassinations and the entrapment of terrorists and involved, increasingly evident that their director, of course, was leaking, and the previous director was leaking, and you know, all the things that are going on. They've weaponized. They actually were involved in bugging Trump.
Yes.
During the electoral process. So why would you spend resources on something as relatively unimportant as the NFL, except to get, you know, kind of your reputation back, cleaning up, you know, college basketball, as compared to so many other things they could be doing? Because nobody's going to give them any blowback. They're going to only get good press and, oh, the FBI, they're on it and all that kind of stuff. To me, it looks pretty transparent to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you, and we're talking about all the how the FBI is arresting all these coaches for college football, supposedly for inappropriate incentivization to the players. But you're right, it's a PR grandstand, and sometimes those things blow up. The reason the BATF raided the Branch Davidian Church in Waco, Texas, was they'd had a string of really bad news stories, and they wanted a win for public relations. And they said, well, we already know these people down at the church. They got lots of guns. We'll just go raid them. We'll look good in the newspapers. They took the newspaper reporters along with them. And that, of course, was a problem because one of the reporters called David Koresh and said, you know, the BATF is coming in here to raid you guys. So the BATF shows up, Koresh opens the door, he's promptly shot in the groin, and it went downhill from there. So yeah, a lot of these agencies will do things trying to get a public relations win, and very often it'll blow up in their faces. Ruby Ridge is a good example.
Well, you know, Mike, they had basically Mueller has been pretty much discredited. Comey certainly discredited.
Yes.
And now they bring in, you know, Louis Freeh, who's not been discredited, and stick him on somebody who can't fight back.
I'm not sure about Louis Freeh either. I mean, he came on in on to the FBI on the very day Vince Foster was murdered. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Peter. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Don in Iowa. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Yes, I noticed you're getting a lot of peacemongers today on the show. That's always a good thing. And some of the people commented on Ron Paul. He was on the Alex Jones show, I guess it was a couple of days ago, maybe yesterday. And yeah, but he pretty much dressed down Alex. Alex was trying to be he's always a cheerleader now for Donald Trump. Anything that happens, he's kind of a cheerleader for Trump. And he's trying to say we got to go into Korea because of this. Ron Paul wasn't going to have any of that. He told Alex, you bought into the neocon propaganda.
Yep.
And so Alex would look kind of forlorn there for a little while, but it's true that in Ron Paul, what he said, that the thing about Korea, and I think you said the same thing one time, is we won't even let the South talk to the North. They wanted to, and they still want to. That's the only way that they're going to solve the thing without everybody in the whole peninsula getting killed, and they realize that. And we should try, just like we supposedly try to do that in the Middle East, try to broker a peace between the two. But no, that's not I don't understand it. And like one of your callers said, I think it was a girl from Texas, we can't win. America can't win when they're fighting the whole world at the same time. It's ridiculous.
No, they can't. But the agenda right now, the United States government does not want peace. They do not want reconciliation. They want chaos and war as a vector to allow them to go into country after country after country and change the government to one that will be amenable to the demands made by U.S.-based corporations. If you look at every single country subject to a U.S. intervention since the end of World War II, the standard of living for the people in that country has plummeted because the wealth of that country is being looted by and for American corporations.
Yeah, but the thing is, failure is what's going to happen. Even the latest times we've tried this, it had nothing but failure. Libya, just turned into the people there are in horrible shape. All the countries they've gone into in the Middle East are in a lot worse shape, and everybody can see this. So I mean, it's not even for whatever their goals are, they're not achieving those goals. And I think it's kind of all these people I think go to the same graduate schools or something, Georgetown or one of these graduate schools, Susan Rice, and they all learn that this is the way it has to be. America has to do this. America has to project power all over the place. But that's the thing of the past. It ain't going to work. But one thing about Ron Paul, he's an old man, but he looks like he's in great shape. And I wouldn't put it past him. He could try to run again in next time.
I will probably support him if he does. I
would have supported him last time. I was a registered Democrat. I would have voted for Ron Paul, and he's the real thing. Whereas Trump is basically he's a phony. Let's face it. Any guy that had a job in the professional wrestling business, you know, I mean, that kind of gives you a hint right there that he's not really genuine, you know.
Well, you know, some of us have jobs when we're young and all we're thinking about is job and making money, and, you know, years later we'll regret it. So I'm not going to hold that particular one against him. Anyway, Don, we're coming up on a commercial break. I'm going to let you go here. Going to get on back here to the news. Apparently, there's a 2-year-old Linux kernel issue, and back when it was discovered 2 years ago, it was not considered a major security threat. Now it's being recognized as a potential local privilege escalation flaw. Identified as CVE 2017-10253, the bug was initially discovered by Google researcher Michael Davidson in April of 2015. And since it was not recognized as a serious bug, the patch for this was not backported to long-term Linux distributions in kernel 3.1077. However, researchers at Quail's Research Labs have found this vulnerability could be exploited to escalate privileges, and it affects all major Linux distributions, including Red Hat, Debian, and CentOS, which means it also affects the Raspberry Pi, which runs Raspbian Linux. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And apparently we're now day 13 of the corruption and bribery trial of New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez, so that's dragging on and on. Huffington Post just ran a headline saying white athletes still standing for the anthem are standing for white supremacy. This appears to be what the agenda was all about, to try and denounce the entire United States as a bunch of white supremacists, which is not entirely accurate. But apparently, the goal here seems to be to make patriotism unpopular and to love your country a sign of bigotry, which it's ridiculous. But again, all the way back last year, they were trying to make patriotism unpopular when Trump came out with his Make America Great Again logo and hats and statement. Oh, Make America Great. It's racist. Even Israel got in and said it's anti-Semitic to talk about making America great again. The globalists are really upset about this. But it really didn't work on out. In fact, if anything, it backflashed the other direction. We're seeing the emergence of a strong nationalist, patriotic, love our country, love our people, not sure about the government movement in this country. And I think that's a very healthy thing right now. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Murr in Wisconsin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. You know, when Trump was talking about the taxes, I had to tune in and look at his little, the recording from it. My eyes bugged out when he said doubling the deduction, because I always do the taxes for 48 years now.
Okay.
And the deduction was always the last was the highest, and that was $12,600 for a couple, and $6,300 for single.
Mm-hmm.
So without the hundreds on there, so it's around 24,000 according to Zero Hedge. You have that article, I guess. Here's a Trump anthem yesterday.
Yes.
Yeah, so, there's a lot more to unfold from this, but I don't know, this guy makes me optimistic. I think he does a lot of bluster, says a lot of stuff. Like, do you remember who Joshua Ryan Goldberg is?
Vaguely, yes.
Yeah, the Jewish troll that doing all kind of international damage, terrorism, basically.
Yeah.
And the FBI busted him, and that was a good bust. But it was under Obama, and 4 days later, Cal Mudstream Media came out with this Muslim bomb clock boy deal. Remember?
Yes, I remember that.
And everybody swallowed that. I mean, I was going nuts. I was sending emails to all the alternative hosts trying to get them to say, "Look, please talk about this." But anyway, they didn't tear his house up, his folks' house up in Florida, right?
Right.
Like they did in San Bernardino. So. But anyway, right after that also, besides this phonery, they released Jonathan Pollard. Remember?
Yeah, I remember.
Ain't that justice? And then, of course, you have this.
No, it isn't. I thought, he committed the same egregious crimes that the Rosenbergs did, and the Rosenbergs got the electric chair.
Mm-hmm. Yep. This guy's on the loose. He's got his little ankle bracelet, I guess, but gives speeches and gets paid for it. And
oh, yeah. He's loved by Israel, and as soon as he's allowed to leave the country, he's going to go back to Israel. They've got streets named after him. He's a big hero to them. But again, when he was spying for Israel on the United States, that was back in that period of time. Remember I mentioned that in 1950s, 1960s, 70s technology, to change the targeting on a nuclear ICBM, you had to go out to the silo, open a hatch in the silo, open a hatch or panel in the actual missile, and reach on in and change the targeting on that missile. It was a big, long, drawn-out process. And what Pollard stole was targeting information, where our missiles were actually pointed, and he sold that to Israel. Israel traded that to the Soviet Union in exchange for increased immigration quotas of Russian Jews to come to Israel. Had we gone to nuclear war at that time with the Soviet Union, we would have lost. That is the seriousness of Pollard's betrayal.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, let me tell you this other, you heard of this Michael Ron, there's another name in there, Kadar?
Yeah.
K-A-Y-D-A-R, okay. That was the end of March, and Trump had sent a whole team of FBI into Israel. That's never been done before. I mean, when he had that presser and he made the whining guy about the tombstones, right?
Yes.
Sit down. You know, he said, nah, I know who you are, you know. I mean, that gave me hope. He wasn't buckling under just because they said boo, you know, like they always do. So, but anyway, after he busted them, Assad and Putin were well aware that was a double false flag that went down in Syria, and he knew he was going to have to take a popularity hit. But you could tell he was doing a weird little dance there with the King of Jordan, you know, Abdullah, out in the White House lawn. I'm like, what is this, you know? But then I've heard several different people that are in the know say that it was a double false flag, you know, that, I mean, basically got rid of some missiles they didn't want. They had already cleaned out the airport. The thing that got hit was hit by a Syrian jet, you know, and that was a stash of phosphorus and chlorine, I guess, that drifted in the air. But there was no sarin, none of that stuff, you know?
No, it's a lie. It was no more real. And they tried this with Syria like 3 different times. Assad is gassing his own people, and never once could they come up with a reason why Assad would do something that stupid. Because the people involved in that part of Syria are Alawites who are staunch supporters of Assad. That would be like saying that Donald Trump went on out and gassed a conservative stronghold. It just doesn't make any sense. And that's why I'm so alarmed that, I mean, the CIA told Trump that there was no question that Assad had gassed those people in Idlib, which prompted that cruise missile attack. Now, maybe they were old cruise missiles, but it didn't come off looking very good. Because they fired 60 cruise missiles. One of them went into the ocean right out of the launcher. The remaining 59, half of them missed the airbase completely, and those that hit the airbase didn't hit anything important. So it made America's military weapons look like they're not very effective at all, as opposed to Russia's recent deployment of their cruise missiles, the Calibers, which all hit their targets when they were going after these terrorist command posts and storage bunkers and the rest of it.
Well, just think, how would you feel if you were, you know, say 30 years ago, you had thought about being president and probably vetted, no doubt, by the FBI, right? Because that's back when Trump said, I guess it was Oprah asked him, and he said, no, not unless it got too bad. So you know it's got too bad. But just after he said that is when the helicopter crash was. That should have taken him out, too. He stepped back off at the last second, took out some of his top people, you know.
Well, you know, there were some problems with his campaign aircraft last year that didn't get a lot of press coverage. I remember seeing him at one of his rallies where he was very obviously wearing a bulletproof vest underneath his clothes.
Oh, yeah, he wears, who is it? Stu Webb says he wears the I forget what level it is, 5 or something, you know, Kevlar. I mean, he you know, he's got all this stuff bulked up on him. You know he does. You know? But, I mean, if you were to come into office and your goal was to make America great again, how would you turn this war machine Titanic around? Wouldn't you have to do a lot of bluff and bluster and take a lot of hits to your popularity? I mean, every time he comes out and has a rally, he gets it built back up. Even when he went there for Luther Strange, right? He said, oh, I made a mistake, and if Roy wins, I'll campaign for him, too.
Well, you know, right now, I mean, during the campaign, Trump went out there and he said all the things we wanted to hear, and His rallies were filled up. Now they're picking his rallies very carefully, where he's only going to places where you have a lot of defense contractors and people who are fully on board with the war agenda, and they'll pack in to see Donald Trump. They're not going to go into any part of the country where you have a lot of military families who've lost their kids in combat or their kids are in wheelchairs. Again, it's all stage-managed theater. Again, whether Trump was just lying to us or whether he's being threatened with his life and the lives of his family, or whether, and again, we know that his own advisors are controlling the information that gets to him so that he only sees the information that is going to lead him to decide what his handlers want him to decide.
Well, listen, I've been sending postcards to him. I've sent 20 now. It's getting hard to find postcards.
Yeah, it is, and I don't think probably one of them has ever gotten through to him directly. No, there's a whole...
Maybe.
First of all postal mail to the White House to Donald Trump actually goes to a separate facility several blocks away where the Secret Service inspects it all.
Right. Well, see, the thing that it's a postcard, there's nothing to look into, okay? There's nothing in the envelope. But even better, even if it never gets to him, Mike, think of all the eyes that see whatever I write on there. That's what I'm thinking of. Everything I send cross country. Have a geezer at this, you know. I mean, I'm putting stuff on there I think people ought to know.
Well, I have absolutely no doubt that they're taking your comments and entering them into a database and keeping count of how many people think the same way that you do. That information will be distilled by some White House staffer, possibly spun by Trump's advisors. But whether or not it will get to him or not...
Probably wonder how come they can't cross-reference me to any medical system, though, because I am my own doctor, and we all should be. We know ourselves best, you know?
Well, again, we had this incident, I think it was last Sunday, where Trump was out there talking to reporters, and one of the reporters asked him about this story where Dana Rohrabaugh met with Julian Assange, and supposedly Assange has got evidence proving that the Russians did not hack the DNC emails, that it was an internal leak, and that there was discussion of a deal. And apparently, from Trump's reaction, he hasn't heard a word about this because White House Chief of Staff Kelly is not letting Dana Rohrabaugh get through to him. So definitely Trump is surrounded by people who are not on his side. They're not loyal to him. They're there to basically protect the deep state from a rogue president, what they see as a rogue president. And they're controlling him.
Yeah, we've got to pray for him. For each other, too. Whether you believe in it or not, it works.
Well, I would certainly like it if Donald Trump would get himself a new laptop that's connected to an outside internet that's not being filtered by his advisors and start doing some reading what's going on. Because I don't think he recognizes at this point how much he's alienated his base that put him into that office last year. Where they're not going to be there to vote for... What?
Let me run this right by you. You know who Dr. Wynn Parker is, right? They're been for like 10, 11 years on RBN.
Yes.
Well, I guess a caller, Clay, from Arkansas, hounded all the different campaign members for Trump and got an interview with him, okay, with Dr. Parker and Trump. So he's well aware of a lot of things. He's well aware. It went on for 90 minutes.
Well, I'll have to check into that. Anyway, Mur, I need to let you go. We're coming to the end of the show, and I got to get some of the other news in here before the end of the program. So thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, we have been talking about how there's an opiate epidemic in this country, and we're not talking street drugs, heroin, or anything like that. We're talking about a flood of opium coming to this country from Afghanistan, and doctors are being incentivized by the pharmaceutical corporations to prescribe these highly addictive medications. And they're turning the American patient into a drug addict, all in the name of continuing profits. And there's a serious crisis in that people are dying of overdoses on these opioid prescription medications. And according to the Daily Mail, right now, medical examiners are saying they can't keep up with the number of people killed by America's opioid epidemic. They already have a backlog that will stretch into 2018, which means if you die of an opioid overdose right now, it's going to be next spring before they even get to look at you. That's how out of control this opioid epidemic really is. Meanwhile, sex diseases have surged to a record high, most of the cases involving chlamydia. And apparently the issue is that gonorrhea is becoming resistant to the most recent recommended treatment, according to the CDC. We're having all these microbes are evolving to be tolerant of the antibiotics. And that's why they're becoming threats again. And we've actually created this mess with the overuse of antibiotics. It created this problem. Now, we all know that there's a documented link between mercury in vaccines and autism, but apparently there is another villain that's just coming on out. This is coming from fellowshipoftheminds.com, and apparently they're now discovering that aluminum used as an adjuvant in vaccines also triggers autism, especially in boys. And if I recall correctly, there's also a link between aluminum and Alzheimer's. And so they're putting it into these vaccines. And callers keep reminding me, that, there's all this talk about you can't have mercury, too much mercury in compact fluorescent light bulbs. You can't have mercury in fish. But by golly, we're going to shoot it into your arm in a vaccine. It's amazing. Now, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is finally starting to get some word out about what's going on. Actually, this is a republication of an article he wrote in 2005 called Deadly Immunity, talking about how there was a conference back in 2000, the Simpson-Wood Conference, that brought together all these government health officials, vaccine manufacturers, and professional medical associations. And apparently, even back then in 2000, they knew there was a problem. They knew there were links between thimerosal and childhood neurological disorders, and it was all hushed up. This cozy relationship between government and industry at the expense of the child's health. But it's good for the economy. If you have to hire special people to take care of your autistic child, see, that's good for the economy. And that's all that really matters, is keeping that economy going, which is a huge lie. More concerns being expressed about mass infertility. A lot of concern that sperm counts in males in the West have halved since the early 1970s. And they're asking, is it environmental? Is it the epicite gene? Is there too much porn out there? We're not sure. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today. Now, over in Europe, the European Union medical establishment has gone on the warpath against homeopathy. And they're out there basically trying to sell the idea that the only ones you should trust with the health of your body are the professional doctors, practitioners, pharmacists, and so forth and so on, even though we know there's all kinds of problems going on there. And most of us are really better off doing as much of our own medical care as we can. And the example, again, is Claire and the formaldehyde precursors, because she went through a period of intense joint pain that prevented her from doing her music. And we went to the doctors, and they gave us the pills and the creams and the special shoes and all the rest of it, and none of it worked. And we spent a bloody fortune on it. And then finally, we figured out for ourselves what was going on. Claire was reacting to formaldehyde in low-end household and cosmetic products. And I remember I walked into her, and she was just devastated that she was in such pain. She could hardly walk. She was feeling like her life was over. And I said, I want to try an experiment. I'm going to take a bunch of the products in our house. I'm going to put them in a box and put them in the closet and see if things get better for you. And if they don't, I'll put the products back in a week. Just give me a week to test on this. The very next day, the pain was gone. Not one of those doctors took a moment to say there might be something in your environment that needs to be removed. It was always, you've got to buy this shot, you've got to buy these pills, you've got to buy these creams, you've got to buy this lotion, buy this other thing. Keep trying it. Sooner or later we'll find something that works. And what the answer was to take something out, not put more in. But apparently the medical industrial complex is not happy with the money they've already got, so they're out there launching this campaign in Europe against homeopathy. How dare you take herbs and supplements? How dare you think that you know what your body needs? Most people instinctively do. When you get a food craving, that's your body telling you that you need something. And you should pay attention to that. Meanwhile, France is going to criminally prosecute a drug company for the false marketing of a diabetes drug that killed 2,000 people. And the reason they're being sued is this pharmaceutical company continued marketing this drug for 30 years after they found out it could kill people. And the drug was called Benfluorex, marketed in France under the name Mediator, to treat diabetes. And the French government is now suing pharmaceutical giant Servier to the full extent of the law. And well, they should. We have become entirely too tolerant of sloppy, dangerous products in our stores. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. He's got lots of interesting things to share with you. We'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network with the lovely Lady Claire. So, aloha, America.